All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our fabulous keynote presentation that we have this afternoon from Hakeem Oluseyi. He is a research professor at George Mason University and at Princeton University. He's an astrophysicist, author, STEM educator, multi-patented inventor, science journalist, TV personality, science communicator, and finally, an inspirational speaker. His research is based on hacking stars to understand our universe better and develop and innovate new technologies. His work has resulted in 11 patents and more than 100 publications covering contributions to astrophysics, cosmology, plasma physics, and the development of space missions, observatories, focal plane instruments, detectors, semiconductor manufacturing, and ion propulsion. It's a very impressive bio, and I'm so excited for him to be here on stage here at the Heterodox Academy Conference. Please welcome Hakeem Oluseyi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. All right, you nailed it. All right. Hello, my fellow scholars, my fellow truth seekers. So I'll tell you guys, I'll start off with a few stories. First off, I was not born with the name I have right now. My name, Hakeem Oluseyi, is not the name that I was born with. Like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Muhammad Ali, I changed my name. And when I changed my name, I created some guidelines for myself. My first guideline was that I wanted my middle name to express who I am. I wanted my first name to express who I wish to become, and I wanted my last name to sort of honor my West African ancestry and have some nobility to it. So my middle name, Muata, it's Swahili, and it means seeker of truth. All right, there's that. Now, it's hard to be a truth seeker. I remember I was a kid, and I used to play in the marching band. I played the tuba, or sousaphone for those of you who are pedantic. And I was in the state of Mississippi, and I was a member of the Mississippi Lions All-State Band in the summer of 1984. And we were driving cross-country on a bus from Mississippi to San Francisco, where there would be the big parade. And at a certain point, we cross where there are these signs that say the Continental Divide. And a young lady in the band asks, "What's the Continental Divide?" And this guy goes, "Oh, that's the line that divides the continent in half." And being a well-actually guy at this point in my life, I said, "Well, actually, it's what divides the waters that flow to the Atlantic and the Gulf from the waters that flow to the Pacific." And he's like, no, it's not. And so we were at an impasse, so we decided to ask the band directors. And the band director said, "No, it's the line that divides the continent in half." And so I let it go, I shut up, right? So that sort of is a philosophy for my life. Convince, show, or let it go, all right? Now, I'm gonna do what I'm not supposed to do. And that is, before you give a talk, if you've ever read like how to give a talk, they say don't apologize for your talk before you give a talk. I'm sorry, y'all. I gotta apologize for my talk. I'm gonna do everything I'd never do. Number one, I'd never put text on my talk slides, but this is gonna be full of text, all right? Number two, I use a lot of color. This one is mostly black and white. And the reason why is because I made it like 2 hours ago. So, true story. But the other thing is that, luckily this group did not ask me for a copy of my talk 2 weeks ahead of time like some people do. But they did ask me for a title. And I thought, oh God, what can I think of that might work? Narratives, Truths, and Realities. And I really, truly had a vision in my mind for that talk. And because of what this organization does, I had so many things I thought I could go into about, just the topics that we discuss, in society and academia and the academy. But ultimately, I felt like if I went down the route I wanted to go, which was to tell you several stories, it would take me about 4 hours. So I decided to break it down. So I had to come up with a new title. So let me show you some of my drafts. All right, there's this one. Now, I know where your mind went. If you consult the Urban Dictionary, it actually stands for, well, that's fantastic. But in this case, I'm going to call it Webb Telescope Fables. So is anybody in here familiar with the James Webb Space Telescope? Yeah? Are you familiar with my, how do I call it, oppression? No, you're not. Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you what happened, all right? This is a crazy story. I've never told it publicly. And then this is another apology. If you ever, if you look me up afterwards and you're like, who was that nerd? Let me see. You'll find that there are certain things I just don't do, right? I don't talk about politics publicly. I keep things kind of light. I try to be productive and constructive. And I don't complain. I hate complainers. I'm a no excuses kind of guy. No explanations, no excuses. But I'm about to complain. All right. So here's what happened. 2015, I saw this article. The article had a provocative title. It was in a noteworthy outlet, Forbes. And basically, James Webb, for whom the James Webb Space Telescope is named, was accused of being a homophobe who led and instigated the effort to remove gay people from public service. And I was like, what? Oh, I have another apology to make. I was deathly ill recently. In fact, the average guy would have died. But thank you, whoever that is. You must also be from the South, the deep South. We have our own humor. Other people don't get it always. So if you hear me say anything that sounds like Paul Bunyan, it's a joke, all right? So then I thought, let me research this further. And I found an article that had been written 5 months earlier by Dan Savage. And basically it said the same thing the other article said. And I found myself, really sort of wondering, what the hell is NASA thinking? If this guy is known to be like that, why would you name a telescope after this guy? And the thing to note for what comes next is what the specific allegations against James Webb were. Number one, he was claimed to be an actively homophobic man in these articles. They said he led the effort to purge gays, lesbians, and other sexual deviants from government service. He led witch hunts. He was instrumental in implementing the requirements. And there was this one statement that each article had that is very, very homophobic, and it was claimed that he was the author of that statement. So I, a year later, joined NASA headquarters. And it turns out that I'm a part of strategic communications. Not at the high level, I'm just how you have the big table and, when you're in government, you have too many meetings. You sit around the big table. Once I get the lay of the land and figure everything out, I go to them and I say, are you guys familiar with this story? Now, my boss, who was, more involved in strategic communication, she says, oh, no, let's go talk to the head of the Webb telescope. And we go talk to this gentleman. And I show him what I have. He says, yeah, man, I've never heard of this either. Send me everything you have. So I sent him what I have, which is these two articles that I just showed you and his Wikipedia article on James Webb, which basically said some of the exact same things. He calls me back to his office a week later, and he says, Hakeem, I looked at these materials, and all I see here is allegations. Would you mind looking into it to find out what really happened? And so I looked into it to find out what really happened. Turned out it was all false. And so after I left NASA, I waited a year and a half so that when I was at NASA headquarters, I did a lot of their outward-facing stuff, right? So I wanted to make sure people knew that it's Hakeem the individual, not NASA, that's making this statement. And I wrote, I have no idea what was in Webb's heart and mind, but what I can say conclusively is that there is zero evidence that Webb is guilty of the allegations against him. Now, I addressed the specific allegations in the articles and in his Wikipedia page. I did not know that earlier, this particular person here, who's going to play a big role in this talk, had said that James Webb, it turns out, before he was running NASA in the 60s, he ran an agency of the government that no longer exists. And that agency was called the Bureau of the Budget. So have you ever heard the phrase economic indicators? James Webb is the person who created that. So he became very close with President Truman at the time. So when President Truman was elected for a second term, he went to so when Truman's first term, stick with me here, George Marshall was the Secretary of State. His second in charge was a man named Dean Acheson. When Truman got his second term, Acheson was named the new Secretary of State. And Truman told Acheson, I am assigning Webb to be the number 2 in the Department of State. And Acheson said, that dude ain't got no experience doing this kind of stuff. And Webb said, Truman, I ain't got no experience doing this kind of stuff. They really liked the word ain't back then. So don't judge me. So unless it's positive, then you can judge me, right? Or constructive criticism, I take that. And so what happens is Truman is like, no, Webb is really an administrative bureaucratic nerd, and we need to bring some order to our foreign affairs. So I want Webb to work on that, all right? And in the 60s, so while Webb's in the State Department, it doesn't go well for him there. He has enemies within, he gets health issues, he gets migraines, and ultimately he leaves federal service. And he's out for about a dozen years, and then he's asked to come back to federal service to run this new agency called NASA, okay? So again, I published my article, and I feel like, yes, now we no longer have to worry about this. Isn't this great? Dude wasn't a homophobe. We could just go do some science, and everything will be awesome. But I had some colleagues who could not take the truth for an answer. So let me tell you the story of what unfolded. First thing, you see that first article up there, that's 2 articles. My colleagues, Lucy and Wolkowitz, wrote this article, The Straights Are Here to Save Us. Because I wrote in the article, I'm like, the reason why I did this is because, at the time we were going through the thing with the Confederate statues, and I'm like, what if I was, living in some town and they had some dude who was known to be super bad, and I had to look at that statue every day. I feel like the town was giving me the middle finger. So I can imagine that the LGBTQ members of astronomy felt that way because people were believing this. So now I hope they don't have to feel that way no more, all right? More of that Southern grammar. So I'll tell you what's in that article. And then they followed that a bit later with this Scientific American article, all right? So now let's get into the details. And then at the same day that they put out that article in Scientific American, within 48 hours, 7 more articles came out quoting these people. So it looked like it was coordinated, which is fine. That's nothing wrong with that. If you want to get your message out there, that's a good way to go about doing it. And then they started a petition to get the telescope's names changed, and they got 1,700 signatures. So let's see exactly what they were saying. So I'm going to clarify this for you. I know it looks bad right here, but don't worry, I'll show it to you more clearly. So basically, here's what happens. These other folks, my colleagues, they look at my article and they say, oh, Hakeem is wrong about this. And they find this guy who was a graduate student at the time named Adrian Lucy. He opens up a book by a scholar named David K. Johnson. David K. Johnson was the leading historian on the topic of what is known as the Lavender Scare. When McCarthy started the Red Scare, there was also this effort to remove gays from government. Anybody who could be a security risk because they could be blackmailed. Adulterers, gamblers, drug users. But there were certain people who really were homophobic. And so they really did go after gay people with a certain vigor, unlike they went after adulterers and everyone else, right? So they turn to David K. Johnson's book and they find a passage. And so let me show you, the purple here is from that article. They basically say, hey, here's how David K. Johnson writes it. President Truman and Undersecretary of State James Webb met to discuss how the Hoey Committee, Hoey was the senator who was going to oversee a committee to investigate whether or not there was a problem with homosexuals, or as they called it at the time, sex perverts in government. to discuss how the Hoey Committee in the White House might, quote, work together on the homosexual investigation. Truman told the undersecretary, meaning Webb, he was sure we could find a proper basis of cooperation and agreed that Webb and 2 White House aides should meet with Hoey and establish a modus operandi. Now, it sounds like that last part, that Webb and Hoey, that they're going to establish a modus operandi, that really does sound like they're saying we're going to find a way to execute this program of going after gay people in government. But that is inaccurate. This is a paraphrase by David K. Johnson. The actual memo is right down there in the bottom corner. Now, let me go back one step. If you look here, what you see here is the passage from David K. Johnson's book. And what you see here is the actual reference for it. And Adrian Lucy said that you can't get it online right now because it was the pandemic, but I'm going to see if I can get a copy of it. And what did these folks do? They assumed that they knew what the answer was. So they write, the record clearly show that Webb planned and participated in meetings during which he handed over homophobic material. So what is that about? So let's get to this. First statement, President Truman and Undersecretary of State James Webb met to discuss. That is not what happened. They did not meet to discuss this. What happened was Truman and Webb had their regular meeting. Since 1960, not 60, since Webb's or Truman's first term, Webb and Truman met regularly. Webb was his go-to guy for a lot of things, okay? They did not meet to discuss this. Here's what they discussed. They discussed these 5 topics here. Now, this guy, Hoey, this Senator Hoey, if you read David K. Johnson's book, it reads, Hoey is quoted as saying, when he found out that he had to be over the head of this committee looking into it, he damn near jumped out of the window. He wanted no parts of it. All right? So what happened? Well, here's what happens. This whole thing of getting gay people was really started by 2 senators, a Democratic senator and a Republican senator. The Republican senator was Senator Wary from Nebraska. The Democratic senator was Senator Hill from Alabama. And they were trying to get this moving forward. And it was not moving forward until a particular guy joined the State Department, and that's when things began to move forward. So what happens is, when things start moving forward, the Senate keeps turning to the State Department and says, what happens is Truman writes this article, the loyalty order, right? Where you're going to investigate people for their loyalty to the American government. We found communist spies from our ally, the Soviets. So, everything, there was a craze about loyalty in the government. So he writes this loyalty order. They begin to investigate people, and one of the categories of people they look for, not just communists, but these moral perverts, okay? So what happens is, if you look at, let me just get back to the point here, instead of saying to establish a modus operandi, they're gonna meet to discuss the necessary problems involved in cooperation. What were those problems? The senators kept asking the State Department personnel to give them the names of all the people that they were investigating for violations of the loyalty order. And Truman was like, hell no, because this is a bludgeon that you can use politically, and that's not gonna happen, okay? So, what happens next? People start writing articles over this. These people who are pushing this narrative, they are good at, organizing people, meeting with journalists and getting interviews. But even though all these articles were going on, I'm the guy who breaks the story. Nobody calls me. But they do call David K. Johnson, the author of The Lavender Scare, the historian who coined the phrase. And he says, David Johnson says, what does he say? He says he knows of no evidence that Webb led or instigated persecution. He did attend a White House meeting on the threat, the one I just told you about, but the context of the meeting was to contain the hysteria that members of Congress were stirring up. I don't see him as having any sort of leadership role in the Lavender Scare. So let's back up. These people were saying, before they got the actual memo in their hand, the fact that David K. Johnson says that him and Truman met and had this shows that Webb was a leader and he was planning it. So let me tell you a little bit what really happened. Here's the source of this particular quote from the book, The Imperial Brotherhood. Wary is the senator I told you about. It goes back to 1943. And then this is from a memo from a guy, Oluseyi, who will come up. He said, it was not until January 1947 when Mr. Purifoy became Assistant Secretary for Administration that the problem of homosexuality in the Department of State was dealt with in a direct and forthright manner. All right? And so there was a guy who is named Robert J. Ryan Sr., and he was interviewed back in 1991. And he said exactly how the whole policy of firing people came about. He said there was this thing going on, and we found out this guy was a homosexual. Purifoy was meeting with George Marshall of the famous Marshall Plan, and they were trying to figure out what to do, and George Marshall says, fire the bastard. And that was where the policy was inaugurated of terminating people with homosexual backgrounds. Now, if you go online and read my 74-paragraph article that is up at the beginning of the just put my name in there and James Webb's name, you'll find it. I give all the detail. You don't have to worry about trying to remember this or anything like that now. So what happens? They, in their article in Scientific American, they write this. They say, okay, he may not have done it himself, but he was complicit because he was in management. As someone in management, he bore responsibility for policies enacted under his leadership, including homophobic ones. Some argue, this is the people who are putting this stuff out, some argue that if Webb was complicit, so was everyone working in the agency's administration at the time. We agree. Oh, do you? You agree with that statement? Well, guess who else was in management at NASA in the 1960s with Webb? Got there before him and was the first chief astronomer. Nancy Grace Roman. Why didn't you title your article Nancy Grace Roman and Webb Telescope need to be renamed? What's different about those two? Does anybody know? Because I can't figure it out. They both white. Anyway. So what happens is things take a really dark turn. I get a call from a colleague, and he says, hey, Hakeem, I think you need to get an attorney. At my old university, I was a professor at Florida Institute of Technology from 2008 to 2019, all right? I was on campus until 2014 when I left, tried to resign, it didn't let me. So that was supposed to be funny. So my old dean calls me up and he says, hey man, I've had to correct 3 different people who told me a story about you that's not true. What is the story? Hakeem is a sexual harasser. I don't know if anybody ever seen these memes where they show an attractive guy and they show a really unattractive guy, and the attractive guy says, hi, you look nice today. Compliment. Unattractive guy says, hey, you look nice today. Sexual harassment. So they accuse me of sexual harassment. Look at me. I'm sufficiently handsome that just existing could be considered sexual harassment. But the truth of the matter is, number one, I've been paranoid my whole life. Number two, there has been a lot of sexual advances in my career. Every single year. But I am the recipient of those, not the instigator of those. Y'all professors too, you know how it goes. All right, you're there, you're all smart and good looking. But no, man, I've been running from them my whole life, right? I'm a nerd. Like even if I wasn't in the classroom and they were my student, if a woman expresses interest in me, I run, typically. All right? That's been my style my whole life. All right? And if I was this harasser, and I'm going to get into it, if I was this harasser, I would leave a trail of creepiness behind me, right? You know what? I take my students to islands, to mountaintops. You know, we go to very romantic places, right? How could I have avoided all this time if I'm the creep? But let's get into it. So some of them, additionally, so in this article, they mentioned me by name 7 times, all right? So let's go into it. So one of the things they say is that my article, my 74 paragraph article, near the end of it, when I discover that Webb is an innocent guy who's been accused of something awful, it triggers something in me because that's been my life, right? From childhood all the way up, I've been accused of a lot of shit I didn't do, all right? You know, you might have heard, like, in my little town in Mississippi, man, the number of times I got pulled over, the number of times I got pulled over and told to lie down on the ground and gotten searched, the number of times I've gotten followed in a store, right? I hate false accusations. And if you've known me my whole life, I say things like, I'd rather let 100 murderers go free than send one innocent person to jail, right? So it triggered something in me. So what did I do? I'll show you in a second. But the point is that they claim that my original article was a barely veiled personal attack on a particular person who was the lead author of the Scientific American article, who made the 2019 statement that Webb did not let gay people and women serve at NASA. And so let me give you the passage of this attack and let me see if you can find it. So I'm going to skip the first 2 paragraphs and, well, I'll just read it. I say it like this. The lavender scare was an injustice of immense proportion. Wrongly convicting one innocent person is also an immense injustice. The layers of failure that led to this misattribution of appalling behavior to James Webb, which has persisted for a decade and a half, are themselves appalling. This entire episode represents an example of shoddy investigative rigor from both scientific scholars and journalists. They all should have known better, and they all should have done better. Toward Stonewall, the book that served as the basis for the misattribution in the Wikipedia article, did not properly cite the sources for the Senate testimony that ignited the lavender scare. The book said that a Secretary of State did it, Undersecretary of State initiated it. It was really John Purifoy. People read that to think it was James Webb, right? Then I say the 2 authors, the journalists, who wrote the articles on Forbes.com and TheStranger.com did not apply proper journalistic rigor. They accepted the rumors without corroboration from authoritative sources, and worse, piled on. The author of the Forbes.com article references a professional astrophysicist as his original source for learning of the allegations against Webb. This scientist propagated unsubstantiated false information as if it were true without performing proper scientific rigor to investigate its veracity. The community of astronomers and astrophysicists in the online social media group, who I talk about in my article, who blindly accepted the allegations, also piled on and were ready to confront NASA even though they did not do proper rigor. Who did I single out? Isn't it obvious? And by the way, this is the end of the article, the 74 paragraph article. You guys know that phrase, TLDR? This article is a TLDR. Too long, didn't read. There it is right there. And so here is the statement from the Forbes article. The author who wrote the article that states the problem, titled The Problem with Naming Observatories So Bigots, he says, I confess I didn't know about Webb's detailed biography, including his State Department witch hunts, until this person first informed me of his anti-gay activities. So if he did not lead State Department witch hunts, and he was not involved in any anti-gay activities, are those not false statements? What am I missing? So then, here's the Twitter account of this person, And here's where they respond to my article. So I'm not going to say everything, but basically they laid a foundation for how they're going to criticize me for the next 2 years to come. So I'm just going to bring your attention to this one right here. I want to be clear. So at the time, I was president-elect of the National Society of Black Physicists. I would be taking the mantle in a month from then. I'm no longer the president. So I want to be clear that I interpret that blog entry as the leader of a professional society. Why do we phrase it that way? To set up a more powerful person against, the oppressor against the weaker oppressed. Of a professional society and a senior scientist. What the hell does that mean? If I'm not directly overseeing you, does it matter? Like, there are senior scientists in China right now. If one of them, criticizes me, does that hurt my career in any way? Suppose one in Seattle does it. Does that hurt my career? It depends who they tell, right? And then they start laying a new narrative of the past. Hakeem and I once had a procedural agreement during the NSVP business meeting in 2011. Turns out I have the minutes from that meeting. There was no disagreement. What happened is the person made a claim. Here was the claim, and I'll show you again later. We had a vote for president. The vote was a tie. I was the administrative executive. I counted the votes. It was a tie. Then we had another vote. And there's one guy, Ed Thomas from Alabama, dope-ass physicist. He wins. And this person says, Hakeem, did you vote? And I say, yes, I did. And they go, well, according to the Robert's Rules of Order, you can't both vote and count the votes. You got that right. Don't ever volunteer to be an election worker because you're not going to be allowed to vote in that case, right? And now he's writing poorly researched articles that are basically hit pieces on me. What? That paragraph 69 of a 74 paragraph article makes that article that doesn't name you, makes that anyway. Then here comes the sexual harassment stuff. So she starts with, it's not just sexual misconduct and harassment, it's also the black men who are choosing to not only mentor, blah, 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 see people publicly loving Hakeem Oluseyi's posts. That's a personal attack on me, my blog article, right? And so over here, I'm also tired of stories circulating about sexual misconduct, harassment, and the like from members of the National Society of Black Physicists. Wow, just so happens to be the organization that I'm about to be president of. What a coincidence. Now we go further, August of that year. This guy, me, wrote a blog article entry caping for a homophobe and unfairly taking a swipe at my integrity and the integrity of a journalist. Now what happened? What triggered this? Well, George Mason University offered me a prestigious professorship. The Robinson professor, right? I did it as a 2-year visiting Robinson professor. A colleague at the university publishes the article that the university wrote congratulating me for joining their faculty, and then this person goes off on him. And so they further say, oh, to be clear, I'm not saying they shouldn't have hired who they hired, but there's hiring, and then there's being over the moon about it when you know that there are problems. What are these problems? My sense of humor? I think so. So then, same day, the spouse is always telling me that definitely I am not my rapist's only victim. Allegedly, they allege that they were raped at a National Society of Black Physicists meeting. I'm not sure about that. I know they say they were sexually harassed, right? And I am often like, maybe, but then someone just gave me intel on a guy who I know was asked to leave his job because he slept with a student, and now I know other places had investigations. Oh, and it's in all caps, so you know it's serious. That's me. I'm that guy, allegedly, right? And we both publish books within 3 months of each other. And they go on to say, I hope it's clear 2 days later that I'm 100% game to support people who are in the game with me, which is why I celebrate people who are on the award long list with me, which turns out we were. If I'm not celebrating a book you'd expect me to be talking about, it might be because the author's sexual misconduct. You know what? I'm about to just turn myself into the police. And by the way, this was in a Twitter DM. So this is the first time I heard about this. Lucien also insinuated I should research why you left FIT, to which I respond, well, that's fantastic. Now they're making stuff up, claiming I have a sordid past at FIT. Ha 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 ha. Tell her she should blog about it. More of the same, right? I take accusations, right? You get the point here. I'm getting confused. And then it turns out that this wasn't the only time. In 2018, I gave a keynote address at the National Society of Black Physicists. Now, here was the thing. In my book that we're talking about, it's my memoir. You all should buy several copies each. Or I'm going to do something. All right? And in this memoir, I snitch on myself. All right? So the truth of the matter is, I grew up in a crime family. My first cousins were early members of this Los Angeles social club you may have heard of, the Crips. They grew up, they robbed banks and worse, went to prison. My father was a drug dealer. I started selling drugs to my dad at the age of 9. Once I got to graduate school at Stanford University, I ain't telling nobody about that. But when I wrote my memoir, I had to be honest and truthful. I'm a straightforward, authentic dude. I had to be honest. So I was putting it all out there. So just before the book, just after I got the book deal, I was given this keynote. And a lot of these people in the National Society of Black Physicists knew me from the 80s. So I said, you know what? I never told you guys the truth about me, so I'm going to tell you my real past. And a part of that story was my awakening, my intellectual awakening. And so a big part of that is when I read my first novel. I was 9 years old. I was on the farm in Mississippi, bored out of my mind in the winter. There was a book in the house that everybody was talking about at the time. I decided to pick it up and read it. That book was called Roots by Alex Haley. After reading that book and realizing how good adult books were, I'm like, let's do this again. Guess what the other adult book was in the house? Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. And as I told the story then, and as I've told the story a trillion times, when I read it as an isolated kid at age 9, unaware of the reality, I thought Hitler was the hero of the story. Because if you think about how we educate people, we're always talking about generals, Alexander the Great, George Washington. So I thought that Hitler was the 20th century version. And when I do this, you can tell I'm not trying. If I'm gonna make a joke at someone's expense, it's gonna be at my expense, right? I'm the type of dude that if anybody's gonna take an L, I'm gonna take the L. I don't like making people feel bad about themselves or anything, right? I don't need, if somebody, talks to me like I'm an idiot, I don't feel the need to correct them, right? Sometimes I am an idiot, but the point is they misrepresent how I told the story, right? And so he said, she goes, your favorite James Webb defender told a Hitler joke during a conference keynote once, but sure, I'm the problem. The joke was, and look how they did it. I read a history book when I was a kid, and I thought Hitler was a great guy because he was just defending his people. I have never said those words in my life, ever. There's nothing in the book that will make me even think that, right? That is a straight out lie. So what happens next? I'm NASA's interlocutor or whatever she said, right? Well, here's why. Their group submitted a FOIA request to get all the emails and everything from NASA when I was there and investigated this. And my old boss, Kristen Erickson, wrote to Paul Hertz, right, who was became the chief scientist, and said, I know you have not had a chance to chat about this for 2 years since I asked Hakeem to look into this matter. What Kristen right there is doing is covering for the guy who's the head of NASA. The head of James Webb telescope. Instead of saying that he's the one who asked me to look into it, she said, I'm the one who asked me to look into it, right? But understand, they didn't recruit me to look into this. I brought it to their attention. And they said, all I see is accusations. Would you look into it and see what the real truth is? And when I found out that he didn't do it, the next step in our strategy was, well, NASA needs to put out a statement. The head of the Webb telescope said, no, we're not putting out a statement. If he had done it, we would need to put out a statement. But since he did not do it, putting out a statement would only draw attention to it. That's not the wise thing to do, all right? So no statement was put out. But I felt like gay people in the community were being tortured by this rumor, so I felt I had a responsibility to put it out after I left NASA. And like I said, I left NASA January 31st, 2019. I put it out in January of 2021. Here we go again. It's pretty interesting. No journalist asked that guy why he left his permanent faculty position. What's notable is that is November of 2022. What they did not know is that a journalist had asked me. So Michael Powell of the New York Times had reached out to me months earlier. And I said, Michael, here's every student I've ever had. And by the way, my research group was 10 to 15 students at a time, roughly, for about a decade, okay? So here's all my students, here's all my colleagues, here's my administrators, talk to everybody, right? And I felt, I know I didn't do nothing wrong, but let me tell you, when people start calling you saying, hey, this dude from the New York Times just called, you get a little worried, right? Because someone's really digging in, and they really dug into my background, right? And so this story was front page news in the New York Times in December of 2022, and then in May of 2023, it was an episode of the Daily Podcast, all right? And so this guy who mysteriously left their faculty position and strangely publicly come after women. Wow, what a horrible guy. So let me tell you what the deal is. In 2010, I read an article that said the average millionaire has 7 lines of income. I was a professor living paycheck to paycheck. And when I read that article, a light bulb went off, bling, right? So I started developing other lines of income. By the time the end of 2015, I was making multiples of my faculty salary outside of my faculty salary. So I wrote to my dean and said, I am resigning my position. And my dean said, no, the hell you're not, all right? I started doing television. That was one of the big things. So what happens is, around the same time, colleagues that I know begin to recruit me to NASA headquarters. But then, at the time, I'm chief science officer of Discovery Science, okay? I got the #1 and the #2 shows on Science Channel. And then they were like, we're gonna give you your big break TV show. I moved to LA, all right? The show was so dangerous, we couldn't get it insured in the US, so I was gonna have to leave the country, go to England for 4 months to record the show, which is even better because now I don't even have to pay for housing, right? I don't have to pay for housing, I'm getting paid. Oh, this is gonna be great. I'm living in an Airbnb in LA. A week before I'm supposed to leave, they call me up and they go, hey, Hakeem, you heard what happened at Punkin Chunkin? I'm like, no, what? They said, well, a cannon exploded and one of our producers has been critically injured. We have to reevaluate risk on all our shows. Your new show is canceled. I was like, hey, NASA, remember that position y'all talking about? Can I come a little early? So I go to NASA headquarters. And I don't do it as a civil servant. I do it as an IPA, the interpersonnel. So I maintain my faculty position at Florida Tech while serving at NASA headquarters. So that's why I left my faculty position. So when my 2 years ended, they said, Hakeem, we want to turn you over to being a civil servant. And I'm like, no, because my agents and everybody are telling me, if you get money from the federal government, you can't take money from just anybody, all right? So my team is telling me, dude, if you stay in the government, you're about to lose out on a lot of money. So as of July 31st, 2019, I left Florida Tech and NASA, and I was about to be an entrepreneurial businessman. I had all these businesses lined up that required bringing people together, and you know what happened. I ended up with no income for 8 months in 2020. And I was like, oh, I thought this account was for retirement. No, it's for pandemic. So that's what ended up happening. So now come the confessions by projection. How can JWST be the thing that tore the community apart? An article was written where someone says the community was torn apart by this particular thing. When Hakeem had already hated me for a decade because of a disagreement we had about how he handled an election. Again, I didn't complete the story before. There was no disagreement. When a woman said that Robert Rules of Order says that you can't both count votes and vote, I said, okay, so that there's no appearance of any funny business by the board, let's do it again, all right? I got out of the meeting, went home. It was 2011, so we couldn't just look it up on our cell phones. And I looked at Robert's Rules of Order, and there was no such. In fact, it said the opposite. It said the person in my position has a vote and is supposed to count the votes, all right? So let's just also get a time ordering thing right. I didn't write about or tweet about Hakeem until he wrote about a blog entry about something he knew I was passionate about. No, I did not. And referenced my views in the blog. No, I did not. And slandered me in the process. No, I did not. Like I'm not the stalker-wish one here. So remember, when was my article written? January 2021. What did they say? I did not write about or tweet about Hakeem until that article. Here's tweets from 2018 about me. Okay? So here is the text from the meeting notes of that 2011 meeting. The members objected to the administrative executive vote voting and counting ballots and stated that the administrative executive vote should be disallowed on the basis that the person counting votes should not also have a vote in the election. The administrative executive stated that he would accept the invalidation of his vote in order to make sure that there was no appearance of conflicted conduct on the part of the officers. So all of this could look like it's personal, all right? It could look like, okay, you were saying this, I said something about it that was to the contrary, you have something against me, you have something against James Webb, but I think what appears to me like there may be a bigger context. Like, are you actually racist yourself? Are you actually sexist? Are you an operative? Y'all don't get that, do you? Anybody seen the movie Undercover Brother? Well, the idea here is that, there's the black people trying to uplift the black people, but then there's the man, and this is white dude in the suit, right? And they're trying to undo all the things that black people do, right? And, back in the Black Panther times, whatever, they had operatives that infiltrated, right? So I'm like, are you an operative? Because look at how this person tweets. Over and over tweeting, black men in physics or astronomy are sexual harassers, if not racist. Here's one. How do you deal with misogyny and microaggressions from black men in your field? Sir, you're a white man, right? In America. I know in other places in the world they don't think like that, but they can. Yeah. What do you think would happen if you tweeted that? Right? I want black men to think a lot about how black women are the most likely victims of misogynistic violence from black men. Is there a race of people you cannot say that about? Right? I mean, isn't that the case? If I've lived in a lot of states, and I've interacted with a lot of people, and I had a lot of fights growing up. Anybody else? Because this new generation, they soft. Anybody? I asked my son, who's 18, I was like, hey man, how many fights you had? He was like, none. Like, what the hell? I'm gonna beat you up myself. But you need to get beat up here and there, right? But the point is, I tell people all the time, I'm saying I'm really lucky because I've been punched in the face by white guys and black guys. I've had guns pulled on me by white guys and black guys. I've been snatched out the car by white cops and black cops. So I know it's more of a that dude thing than it is a race thing, right? Let's get to more of these beautiful ones. When are folks studying sexual harassment and gender bias going to get their shit together and finally study the race in which black men and others in academia specifically target black women? You know, it goes on and on. It goes on and on and on. And I heard yet another story, right? So I'm like, oh, and by the way, what's good for black men must be bad for black women. This whole layout is extraordinarily bad. Look editorially. 32 black men as people on top of 15 black women as books. Through the lens of black men who like their books. What editor looked at this and thought, yes? Here was the article right here, right? So it feels like we're finally in a moment where black women were getting their due in the literary community, and the reaction wasn't like finally some equity, but instead, oh my God, what about black men, right? So listen, you know, this is ridiculous. This is my book, and it has a young adult version who you can buy for the teenagers, and this, you're supposed to be chuckling right now. Right. But folks, you know, I tell you, I feel like the extremism in our country, you know, I think about it as an adult, as a citizen. You know, I think about what's good for my nation. And at this point in my life, I've been to 44 countries around the world. I've worked a lot in Africa. I've worked a lot, you know, in the Eurasian continent as well. And I see trends in societies. And there's one thing that is the bane of every society, and that is tribalism. Whether it's partisan tribalism, racial tribalism, ethnic tribalism, it will destroy you from within. And right now, we have this thing in academia where people are finding every way to slice ourselves to form different communities. And when I look at America and I compare it to the nations I see around the world, I see America as an impossible nation, right? We're not perfect, but to be as diverse as we are, and we don't have militias killing each other all the time, historically, you know, we're set up to fall apart, and yet we are a thriving, cohesive nation. But the reality is that it's not that way by accident. You have to work on it. You have to tamp down these voices when they pop up. But in academia, these voices are being raised up. So in February, I wrote 3 letters of complaint, anti-harassment complaints. I filed one with our university. I filed one with the American Astronomical Society, and I filed one with the National Academy of Sciences. They serve on the National Academy of Sciences committee, and the National Academy of Sciences specifically has an anti-harassment policy for people that serve on their committees. So, what were the responses? The University of New Hampshire said, only people that are members of our community can make complaints of harassment against members of our community. The American Astronomical Society took the complaint seriously, interviewed me and at least several others that I'm aware of. I have yet to hear a response from the National Academies of Science. Imagine if it was someone of a different demographic profile. Imagine if it was someone who didn't present themselves as, oh, I am the activist fighting for everybody that is underserved or unprivileged. Unless, of course, you know, I'm shitting on black men yet again. So I don't know what the solution for this is. I have no idea. I'm glad that an organization like Heterodox Academy exists. I will say that a person that you gave an award to, Beatrice Villarreal, I didn't know who she was. She reached out to me. This was over a year ago. And we had a Zoom conference, and she broke down on that Zoom conference because of what that same person had publicly said about her. And yet, who do we turn to? I don't want to spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in a defamation lawsuit. What do you do? I have no idea. Anybody know a hitman? Just kidding. I'm hiring a hit woman. I kid. No violence is never the answer. It's a joke, but today's sensitive times, I shouldn't make such jokes. I apologize. But it's, what can I say, man? I'm going to keep doing me. I'm going to keep sticking with the truth. And if that gets me in the sights of these sort of people, so be it. But what I'm not going to do is pander or pretend I don't see reality. Thank you all, and I'm open for questions. How long was that supposed to take?
Thank you very much, Dr. Oluseyi. I'd ask if you could raise your hand if you have a question, and while I'm looking around the room, I'll take a little personal privilege too. We'll take about 10 minutes if that works for you.
Oh yeah, whatever you need.
So is this partly a social media story? We saw a lot of tweets up there, and a lot of people in this room are thinking about how academic truth-seeking changes when everybody's talking to everybody on Twitter.
Yeah, it is partly that in two ways. The thing I didn't put up there is even back in 2019, a young woman contacted me. She said, Hakeem, you probably don't remember me, but we met at a conference, and I was applying to grad school at the time, and I asked you if you could help me with my my grad school application, and you did, and I got in grad school. Thanks, but that's not why I'm contacting you. The reason why I'm contacting you is that there was this woman with a private Facebook group, and she's dragging you over here. And it was about that Hitler thing, right? And I just want to know what the deal is. I was like, no, they're misrepresenting my words. Here's what really happened. And she goes, okay, that sounds more like the Hakeem I know. So, being like the only reason this is even worthy of addressing, because this person has over 100,000 followers on Twitter, because they are a successful author in some ways. They do have a following. If it was a person who had no following, then, it would just be like anybody else talking trash about you, which for me, decades ago, I just assumed at all times somebody's insulting me somewhere, right? And I could care less about that. It only matters if it actually matters. This one actually mattered. What I did not talk about was the actual real discrimination that occurred. So it's not, did I hear a yell? Oh, okay. You got it too? I'm dying up here. So what I didn't talk to you about, so what you see, it's not just a social media thing, it's also an in-person thing. I'll give you a couple of examples. So a faculty member at the University of New Hampshire contacted me and didn't contact me, they contacted a colleague who contacted me and told me that they were about to hire me to be a speaker for an event, and this particular person spoke up and said, we can't hire him because he has sexual harassment allegations. In the room was my former Florida Institute of Technology colleague. And he said, wait a minute, I was Hakeem's colleague at Florida Tech for years and was his department head. I'd never heard this. They decided not to hire me. When I wrote my memoir, you asked people to blurb your book. So there is a prominent Mississippi author named Oluseyi who wrote the book Heavy. Anybody know it? Yeah? So I showed up to speak at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and on their bulletin board is a poster for my talk and one for Layman's talk. And so I take a photograph of it, post it on my Instagram, and I go, what do you know? 2 Mississippi intellectuals showing up at the same place, and I tag them on it. We begin to chat, and I said, hey, Oluseyi, I hope, forgive me for mispronouncing the name, would you blurb my book? He was like, I would love to. Send him the manuscript. When the time for it to come, well, before it was time for him to deliver it, he wrote to me, he's like, dude, I am loving this book. As you will also when you buy multiple copies and give them away to people who will also love it. It's a really good book. Sold it twice for a movie. So, true story, sold for a movie. So, when it came to the deadline, I wrote to him and I said, hey man, I need it now. Can you mind getting it to me sometime this week? He's like, yeah, no problem. The next day he wrote to me, he goes, hey man, I actually was talking about this with a friend last night, and she informed me that you guys had some kind of, same person pass, so I can't do it. Then she said it would hurt her if I blogged your book. All right? There are two prominent women intellectuals who I had a very good relationship with, one at Princeton, one at Stanford. They started working with this person. Suddenly, now they lost my number. I reach out to them, they don't respond to me anymore. So, that's not social media. That is the Whisper. What's that thing called? Whisper Network or something like that? Yeah, that's the Whisper Network. So they've dragged my name through the mud. And so when the New York Times had these two things that came out, they started, her and her husband and some others started saying, oh, this is a Darvo type attack. What does that Darvo thing mean? I had never heard of it. That's when where you make the victim the actual perpetrator. So I'm the real perpetrator because of that paragraph in my article that didn't name the person, right? That makes me the real perpetrator. Everything they've said about me, oh, they're not really attacking Hakeem. That's, I don't know what the hell that's about. Questions, yes.
Hi.
I can't see a thing, by the way. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you for your story. I was wondering if, just a slight pivot, you could tell us a little bit more about your story, like how did you get into, is it astrophysics? I don't know anything about science, but that's also, this is an amazing story and riveting, but I'm sure your story about what you've done is also really cool.
Yeah, and that was one of the stories I was going to tell, but I decided to tell this one. So I've never told it before. And I felt like this was the appropriate audience for it if there ever was going to be one. So here's the Cliff Notes. All right, so my dad drops out of school when he was 9 years old. He's born in 1933 in Mississippi. He leaves home at 13, goes to New Orleans, gets a job parking cars for 25 cents a day. My mother drops out of school at 16, pregnant with my older sister. And coincidentally, my mother's mother dropped out of school at 16, pregnant, and my sister dropped out of school at 16, pregnant. So I'm not just the first person to get a college degree, I'm the first person to graduate high school, all right? My parents meet, they get married, my mother already has my sister, and when I'm 4 years old, my parents divorce. And my mom starts moving us every year. So first we go to LA, then Houston. So I have this superpower that if you tell me a song that came out anytime in the 70s, I can tell you what year it was. Because I know where I was listening to that song. I can, go back there. And since I moved every year, I know I was in the 4th grade. It must have been it, right? So I always move between South Central Los Angeles, Houston 3rd Ward, New Orleans 9th Ward, and New Orleans East. And you know what those neighborhoods have in common, right? Once you go ghetto, anyway, they're dangerous. And, my mom had, now I understand, to be mental issues, okay? So she would just leave me with people. And so when I'm 9, I tell you, I read the novels. When I'm 10, I start doing experiments, and I make my first big discovery. When I'm 11, I'm in LA, and they give me an IQ test. Turns out my IQ was 162. I don't know what that means. And then, once they discover, oh, you got this high IQ, what do you think happens? Well, what happened to me was, over the course of the next 16 months, I lived in 9 different households and attended 5 different schools across 3 states, all right? And I'm out there by myself in the hood. So I learned a few lessons, like it's better for me to punch you in the face before you punch me in the face. It's better for me to intimidate you before you intimidate me. So I did that thing that we called back then going bad, right? After Tupac came out, everybody calls it thug life. But you're supposed to chuckle at that too, thug life, the tattoo. So my mom sees what's happening with my cousin, sees the handwriting on the wall, and she decides she's going to move me to rural Mississippi where my dad's from. And that was one of the best decisions anyone has ever made for me. Now, when I was 10 years old, after reading Roots and Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, we moved to New Orleans, and I want books, but we ain't got no books. We got the World Book Encyclopedias, and we got the Bible. And so I'm like, I'm going to read one or the other. Which one? The one in modern English. So I decide I'm going to read the World Book Encyclopedia from A to Z, which I ultimately do. But when I get to E, I discover Einstein and relativity. I was always interested in natural stuff. I was always interested in weird stuff. And that was the collision of weird and natural world. So I vowed that I'm going to teach myself relativity. And I did. I went about teaching myself relativity. So fast forward now, I'm a junior in high school. My girlfriend gets a TRS-80 color computer from Radio Shack for Christmas. Now, in Mississippi, we don't date. We do what's called courting. Here's how courting works. On Sunday, the boy goes to the girl's house. There is no other alternative. You sit at opposite ends of the couch for about 3 or 4 hours while the family watches you. Then you go home. All right? So she got this new computer, so I'm like, what the hell am I sitting here with you for? I'm going to go learn how to computer. So the TRS-80 came with a little booklet that taught you the programming language BASIC. So I taught myself the programming language BASIC. That same year, these professors from the University of Southern Mississippi, let me tell you about my high school. My high school was all black, Heidelberg High School. Well, we did have one white guy, James Roberts, bless his heart. And a mile down the road was the all-white Heidelberg Academy. My school was a poor performing school. Around the turn of the century, Mississippi evaluated all of its schools, and every school in the state was given a grade. 4 schools received failing grades. 2 of them were my middle school and my high school. So when these professors decided to do outreach, they showed up at our school, and they told us about this thing called science fairs. So we decided, yeah, we're going to participate in the science fairs. So I had to come up with a project, so I'm like, I know what I'll do. I'll program relativity. So a few months later, I ended up winning the state science fair. That's funny. First place in the state. And the judges were like, dude, you should become a physicist. But I was already committed. When we were sophomores, we were all ushered into the cafeteria. We were given the ASVAB, Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Exam. I scored high, so I get called to the principal's office. I'm a sophomore. And the principal looks at me, Mr. Green. He goes, son, what are you doing after high school? He's about 6'3", I'm 6'1". I go, I didn't have a plan, but I knew the right answer. So I say, I'm going to college. And he goes, really? How are you going to pay for it? And I reply, I'm a good student and I'm a good musician. I'll get a scholarship. Then he goes, come here, young man. And he takes me into his inner office, and in there waiting is a Navy recruiter, Senior Chief Gage. Senior Chief is like, look, most I can offer you is $20,000 a year. You guys don't seem impressed. Let me translate 1983 Mississippi to 2024 Chicago. Most I can offer you is $850 trillion a year. Right? You heard that too. Then he says, and if you go nuke, and I know you will, if you re-enlist after 2 years, we automatically promote you to E5 and we give you a $30,000 signing bonus. Now, we don't give you a check for $30,000. We give you a check for $15,000 and give you the rest of the installments. So as soon as I turned 17, I signed up for the U.S. Navy. I went to boot camp. I get in boot camp. My recruiter, Senior Chief Gage, he was trying to get me into the academy, Naval Academy. He couldn't figure it. We didn't know how to do it. Didn't happen. He finds this other program called Boost, Broadened Opportunity for Officer Selection and Training. It was a program designed to take talented enlisted people, send them to college, and have them become officers. And so I get accepted into Boost. In Boost, there were 2 math classes, the regular math class and the remedial math class. Guess which one I was in? The hell? I'm an astrophysicist. Y'all don't believe in me? You're right, I was in a remedial math class. But oh, did we have a great teacher, Mr. Galuli. We were taken from arithmetic through calculus in a single year. And lucky for me, I got kicked out of the Navy right after we completed algebra and started trig. You slap a few officers. I'm kidding, I didn't slap no officers. I have atopic dermatitis, and at the time, you were not allowed to serve on ships with atopic dermatitis. So all I had to do was write a chit, say I respectfully request to be discharged from the Navy, and I was out of the Navy. So I leave, and I'm aimless. We're in a recession at the time, and my buddies from high school who had gone to college, you know, we were out at the club one night smoking weed, and See, you're supposed to laugh at that too. And they are like, dude, what is wrong with you? You need to come up to college with us. And I'm like, I don't see a place for me. I knew you went to college to be one of four things: doctor, lawyer, teacher, and engineer. Engineer, I had no idea what that was. Teacher didn't really seem cool. Attorney, ain't that evil? A doctor is kind of like president to me at the time. Sure, it's possible, but probably not for you, right? And then they were like, yeah, man, it's 5 to 1 female to male. So that was it. I was sold. So I showed up at Tougaloo College, not realizing I was supposed to apply first. And they got me admitted. While there, I found myself addicted to crack cocaine and dropped out of college. And when I decided to get that out of my life, I took a job working as a janitor at this hotel, making $4 an hour. And, I could never get 40 hours a week, so I was not even making $100 a week. I think my apartment at the time was like $180 a month. And I was so broke that what I would do is when I got to the hotel, I worked 3 to 11. First thing I do is I go walk the hallways, because when people order room service, they get a tray, they set it outside the door when they're done. So I would go and walk and eat people's leftovers, right? So one day my big break occurs, and that is a bellhop gets fired. And I think if I get a bellhop position, I can make $100 in tips in a day. So I apply for the bellhop position, and guess what? I don't get it. So I'm like, I can't go from janitor to bellhop? I'm going back to college. So I re-enrolled in college. So let me tell you what the funny thing is. That was 1988. 2016, Tougaloo College brings me back to honor me for the first time. They gave me 3 honors. That time it was a presidential lecture. Later, they gave me an honorary doctorate. And just last month, they gave me this thing that's called the Vanguard Award. But when they brought me back to honor me, guess which hotel they put me up in? Yeah. And what happened was when I walked in, I immediately recognized the guy behind the desk, and he immediately recognized me. He was the only person still working there since 1988. Yeah. And, when you're at the executive level, there's that room where you can go get your snacks or whatever. I used to clean that room. And now I'm the guest in there. And then there was another end where there was this big brass bar. And because I was previously in the Navy, I really knew how to shine brass. So I used to, and there was some event going, I just crashed the event. And just, it was amazing. And so, there's a lot more to my story. I get to Stanford, and they try to kick me out every year for the first 4 years. And, I make it past that. A brother can't catch a break. But I do catch breaks, right? It's hard, but so what? I realize how hard it can really be. I've been in the slums around the world, and I think being in my position in the United States of America, late 20th century, early 21st century, it's a pretty good place, even though I have hardships, right? So I keep trudging along, and, I'm still curious and want to invent and create and discover, so that's me, historically.
Let me say what I imagine your students would say, and what I really imagine that the late Dr. Webb would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
And
right.
I just want to say one last thing. I've become very close with the Webb family now. Serious, true story. We're pals. So his daughter and son-in-law and I, we hang out all the time. And last year I gave them both COVID.
Let's move to the foyer for a reception. Thank you.